Thank you, Mr. Buxman. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if you'll turn to 3.10, it's entitled Rules for Deliberations. These are some general rules that apply to your discussion. You must follow these rules in order to return a lawful verdict. You must follow the law as it is set out in these instructions. If you fail to follow the law, your verdict will be a miscarriage of justice. There is no reason for failing to follow the law in this case. All of us are depending upon you to make a wise and legal decision in this matter. This case must be decided only upon the evidence you have heard from the testimony of the witnesses and have seen in the form of the exhibits and evidence and these instructions. This case must not be decided for or against anyone because you feel sorry for anyone or are angry at anyone. Remember, the lawyers are not on trial. Your feelings about them should not influence your decision in this case. Your duty is to determine if the defendant has been proven guilty or not in accord with the law. Whatever verdict you render must be unanimous. That is, each juror must agree to the same verdict. Your verdict should not be influenced by feelings of prejudice, bias, or sympathy. Your verdict must be based on the evidence and on the law contained in these instructions. Deciding a verdict is exclusively your job. I cannot participate in that decision in any way. Please disregard anything I may have said or done that made you think I preferred one verdict over another. You may find the defendant guilty as charged in the indictment or guilty of such lesser included crimes as the evidence may justify or not guilty. If you return a verdict of guilty, it should be for the highest offense that has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. If you find that no offense has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, then, of course, your verdict must be not guilty. The verdict must be unanimous. That is, all of you must agree to the same verdict. Only one verdict may be returned as to the crime charged. The verdict must be in writing, and for your convenience, the necessary verdict forms have been prepared for you. All right, I have the verdict forms up here with me on the bench. There are special verdict forms for counts 1 through 5 also. This is the verdict form as to count 1. I'm going to explain to you how these verdict forms work. This is count 1, so you would find that we, the jury, find as follows as to count 1. You can only check 1. Whoever the foreperson is, you can put a check or an X mark, but just 1. The first is the defendant is guilty of first-degree murder. B, the defendant is guilty of second-degree murder. C, the defendant is guilty of manslaughter. D, the defendant is not guilty. If you find Mr. Loyd guilty of any count, you're then going to find that you have special verdict forms. And this is true for each one of these verdict forms. So these would be the special verdict forms as to count 1. There's 2 of them. It depends on what he's found guilty of, which special verdict form you need. But these pertain to the firearm, all right? And they're pretty self-explanatory. For example, the verdict form for count 1, if you find the defendant guilty of second-degree murder, you then use this special verdict form. This special verdict form says if you find the defendant guilty of manslaughter. So for each count, if you find him guilty of something, there's a special verdict form. And again, check 1 on each special verdict form. And there's 1 for each count. There's a verdict for count 2, and then special verdict forms for count 2. Understand? All right. These will all come back into the jury room with you once we're done with the instructions. A separate crime is charged in each indictment, and although they have been tried together, each crime and the evidence applicable to it must be considered separately and a separate verdict returned as to each. A finding of guilty or not guilty as to one crime must not affect your verdict as to the other crimes charged, except as explained in the instruction for legally interlocking counts. Legally interlocking counts. Counts 1 and 4 and counts 1 and 5 are linked in that the crime charged in count 1, first-degree murder, or the lesser included offenses of second-degree murder or manslaughter are the essential elements of the crime charged in count 4 and 5, attempted felony murder. You must first consider the evidence applicable to count 1, first-degree murder. If you find the crime in count 1, first-degree murder, or the lesser included offenses of second-degree murder or manslaughter have not been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, you must find the defendant not guilty on counts 4 and 5, attempted felony murder, or the lesser included offense of manslaughter by act. If, on the other hand, you find that the crime charged in count 1, first-degree murder, or the lesser included offenses of second-degree murder or manslaughter have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, you must then consider the evidence applicable to counts 4 and 5, attempted felony murder. A guilty verdict on count 1, first-degree murder, or the lesser included offenses of second-degree murder or manslaughter does not require a guilty verdict on counts 4 or 5, attempted felony murder. You should find the defendant guilty on counts 4 and 5, attempted felony murder, only if you find all the elements of that crime, including the essential elements contained in count 1, first-degree murder, or the lesser included offenses of second-degree murder or manslaughter were proven beyond a reasonable doubt. In just a few moments, you will be taken to the jury room by the court deputies. The first thing you should do is choose a foreperson who will preside over your deliberations. The foreperson should see to it that your discussions are carried on in an organized way and that everyone has a fair chance to be heard. It is also the foreperson's job to sign and date the verdict form when all of you have agreed on a verdict and to bring the verdict form back to the courtroom when you return. During deliberations, jurors must communicate about the case only with one another and only when all jurors are present in the jury room. If a juror goes to the restroom, the deliberation should stop until the juror returns. You are not to communicate with any person outside the jury about this case. Until you have reached a verdict, you must not talk about this case in person or through the telephone, writing, or electronic communication such as a blog, Twitter, email, text message, or any other means. Do not contact anyone to assist you during deliberations. These communications rules apply until I discharge you at the end of the case. If you become aware of any violation of these instructions or any other instructions I have given in this case, you must tell me by giving a note to the court deputy. If you need to communicate with me, send a note through the court deputy signed by the foreperson. If you have voted, do not disclose the actual vote in the note. If you have questions, I will talk with the attorneys before I answer, so it may take some time. You may continue your deliberations while you wait for my answer. I will answer any questions, if I can, in writing or orally here in open court. During the trial, items were received into evidence as exhibits. You may examine whatever exhibits you think will help you in your deliberations. Some exhibits will be sent into the jury room with you when you begin to deliberate. If you wish to see an exhibit not provided, please request that in writing. In closing, let me remind you that it is important that you follow the law spelled out in these instructions in deciding your verdict. There are no other laws that apply to this case. Even if you do not like the laws that must be applied, you must use them. For 2 centuries, we have lived by the Constitution and the law. No juror has the right to violate rules we all share. Any additional instructions requested by state? Defense? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to send you back into the jury room. Lunch is back there, so I'll handle that in a second. Okay. We're going to send you back into the jury room. Lunch is back there. You may begin your deliberations while you're eating lunch or after. It's completely up to you. It's going to take us a few minutes to assemble the exhibits and send those back into the jury room with you also, and the verdict forms. So it's going to take a couple of minutes. Don't think we've forgotten. With the exception of jurors 1475 and 961, the rest of you may retire to consider your verdict. Please take the jury instructions and your notepads with you. All right, I'm sure you two have now figured out that you're the alternates in this case. However, because of the nature of this case, you are not being released at this time. You do not participate in these deliberations, and we have to wait and see what your fellow jurors come back with as a verdict. If they should come back with a verdict of first-degree murder, you will be needed for the penalty phase. You must sit through that. So you are not discharged as jurors in this case. They come back with anything lesser than you'll be discharged. Everyone will be. So what we're going to do with you two ladies is you're going to get lunch also. You can't have any contact with these jurors until such time as they reach a verdict. So we're going to send you all back to the hotel. The deputies will escort you and take you through the procedures. Even at the hotel, if these jurors should not reach a verdict tonight, you cannot have contact with them. They are deliberating, and you are not at this point. So you won't be able to have contact, all right? You may still not discuss this case among yourselves. You have not been discharged as jurors. Do either one of you have any questions about the instructions I have just given you? No? All right, thank you very much. I'm going to release you to the sheriff's office. They're going to escort you back to the hotel. Have a good afternoon. The parties need to check the evidence and make sure that what's going back is what's been admitted and is supposed to go back to the jury. Anything else we need to talk about?